headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. The ruling African National Congress has pledged to correct its mistakes following its win in South Africa's general election. ANC Deputy Secretary General Jesse Duarte says that the next task for the party is to correct its past mistakes, especially countering corruption and increasing economic growth. He added that the election demonstrated that voters want an ANC which is united and which remains true to the values and principles upon which it was founded. The Economic Freedom Fighters Party says it is not surprised by the election results, as it registers a significant gain. The results showed significant gains for the EFF compared with the last elections. It is now the official opposition in 3 out of 9 provinces in South Africa. The party's policies have been mainly focused around defeating capitalism. The party vowed to continue its fight against imperialism in the parliament.
No, we were not surprised. Actually, we were not satisfied. We were hoping for more. But unfortunately, we're a new party. We don't have the resources of the other 2 big parties. We now have a track record. People have seen how we perform in parliament. They've seen dramatic changes which have been caused by our interventions in parliament in the past 5 years, such as the removal of President Zuma, the institution of the State Capture Commission, and many others.
Some smaller parties increased their vote share, and the election was conducted with relatively few problems. Our correspondent in Pretoria, Matuba, has more.
As soon as the Independent Electoral Commission of South Africa announces the official results, the African National Congress Party will have to form a government in the coming weeks, and that will be presided by the Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. The African National Congress hasn't done as well as it has in previous elections, but it has managed just over 57% of the vote, followed by the Democratic Alliance and the Economic Freedom Fighters. And we also know smaller parties are still complaining about their share of the vote, even threatening to take the Independent Electoral Commission to court if there isn't an independent audit. But the IEC has already committed to that audit, saying that even that audit will not influence the outcome of Saturday's official final results. So it remains to be seen if this court process will delay the official announcement of the results, but it's unlikely to change the outcome of the African National Congress's victory in the 2019 elections. The observer missions that have been deployed to South Africa to monitor the elections have given a thumbs up to the elections, saying that South Africa is a progressive democracy which holds elections every 5 years as it is prescribed by the Constitution. And 2 head of state from Africa were heading some of those missions. The former president of Nigeria and former president of Tanzania were here as the observers monitoring those elections. And now we know that South Africa is in a celebratory mood because there were very minimal incidents that could have derailed the process of the elections in the past few days. It has been a grueling season of campaigning, with parties competing for the country's vote. But now we know the African National Congress will be led by Cyril Ramaphosa to lead the government in the next 5 years, and hopefully revive the struggling economy and hopefully create jobs, because that has been one of the big campaign cards for political parties, to create jobs and revive the battling economy. It's back to you, studio.
Now to Venezuela, where President Nicolas Maduro called on the nation to participate in the second phase of the Dialogue, Action and Proposals Day. The initiative began last weekend with community debates being held in order to identify and correct issues in public management. From Twitter, President Maduro invited citizens to participate in further discussions taking place across the country to deepen Venezuela's democracy. And Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Ariaza has responded to comments made by Colombia's President Iván Duque on social media. He said that Duque lies in a scandalously compulsive way to evade his responsibilities and distract public opinion. He should put his trousers on and fulfill his commitments internationally and with his people who have desperately sought peace for decades. This response comes after Duque publicly accused President Maduro for being a promoter, financer, and sponsor of the ELN. 170 Venezuelans will arrive from Ecuador on 2 commercial flights as part of the Return to the Homeland Plan, an initiative which President Nicolas Maduro began back in August 2018. The foremost reason why these Venezuelans opted to return home has been economic problems and difficulty obtaining decent employment in countries which they migrated. That's according to 64% of returning citizens. As an additional reason for return, 54% of migrants say that they face constant harassment, denouncing incidents of xenophobia, labor exploitation, and other abuse. And 21% say they were suffering from serious health problems.
We came here for my husband's spinal surgery. He has 4 hernias and there are some disc displacements. Some friends told us that here he would be able to do it here, and we went to the Eugenio Espejo hospital. But unfortunately, when everything was moving forward, when the Ecuadorian girl was killed at the beginning of this year by her Venezuelan boyfriend, things moved backwards. And they moved us for another hospital. Finally, the surgery was never done, so that's why we came. But it didn't work out for us. I do think that this plan is wonderful, the best that our president could have done for us, for all of us, for all the people that, as us, are not trying to leave the country or emigrate, but they travel for a real need, an emergency, an illness, hard things, and to avoid to travel 4 days by bus and to have this great help is really a benefit for all Venezuelans.
To date, almost 7,000 Venezuelans have returned from Brazil as part of the government initiative. Over 2,500 have returned from Peru under the plan. 2,800 have made the journey back to Venezuela from Ecuador, and nearly 1,000 in total were able to return from Colombia, Dominican Republic, Argentina, Chile, and Panama. The grand total of repatriated Venezuelan citizens is now 14,070. And the Bolivian Minister of Government, Carlos Romero, has announced that Pedro Montenegro has been arrested for drug trafficking. In a press conference in Santa Cruz, he said that an international arrest warrant had been issued for Montenegro since 2015 for trafficking controlled substances. He is accused of being a part of a wider network linked with Brazilian police. Montenegro is also accused of controlling 5 police officers in the Bolivian city of Santa Cruz. The 2 former police chiefs have already been sent to jail for their involvement in the case. Assets of more than $4 million have also been seized by law enforcement.
We won't discard that in the future there may be new elements to the investigation, but it's important that this criminal structure surrounding Pedro Montenegro Paz has been identified, characterized, and that its main members are under preventative detention in Palmasola jail, as well as at San Pedro.
The 5th regional summit of the movement towards socialism is being held in Potosi, Bolivia. Addressing the convention, President Evo Morales celebrated the anniversary of the declaration of the typical hula hula dance as the cultural heritage of the state of Potosi. Morales said that recognizing this dance and other traditions of the indigenous peoples is a symbol of struggle and cultural resistance. He also summed up the achievements of his administration compared to previous governments. The president said that Bolivia's progress is the result of the Bolivian people's unity.
Hermanas y hermanos, cuando llegamos al gobierno, ¿cuánto era el PIB per cápita? $900.
Last year, we reached more than $4,000 per capita. It's the result of the people of Bolivia.
President Nicolas Maduro announced that investigations into April 30th's failed coup attempt show that the former director of the Venezuelan intelligence service, Sabine, was working undercover for the CIA.
The man who was behind the coup is a coward and a traitor. His name is Colonel Manuel Ricardo Christopher Figuera, the former head of Sabine. He was the one who helped to stage the coup, but he did not show his face in Altamira as the coup attempt began. He was not there. He abandoned his troops. He ran away early on the 30th of April, and he is still on the run. Our investigations have confirmed that Manuel Ricardo Christopher has been working for the CIA for more than a year, and he was working undercover as the head of our intelligence service.
President Maduro also pledged his support and complete trust in the country's defense minister and other authorities.
Before the country and the world, I reaffirm my complete confidence and trust with Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez, with the President of the Supreme Court, Michael Moreno, and with the Commander of the Presidential Guard, General Hernandez Dala. They have all of my support.
Venezuela is reopening its land border with Brazil and its maritime border with the island of Aruba, but not with other Dutch Caribbean islands. The borders were closed in February when the United States and its allies tried to force so-called humanitarian aid into Venezuela.
In the case of the Caribbean islands, we have only received a commitment of respect and solidarity and joint work with the authorities of Aruba, but not with the rest of the authorities that are part of the Dutch kingdom, like Bonaire and Curaçao.
Venezuelan opposition figure Juan Guaido held a rally in one of the wealthiest districts of Caracas. He and other members of the opposition took to the upscale Las Mercedes neighborhood to try to rile up his base as allies in the U.S. government continue to make appeals to the armed forces. The gathering in the Alfredo Sadel Plaza follows numerous calls to mobilize, which were met with considerably low turnout. We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. I'm joined today by independent journalist Eva Bartlett. She's reported on the ground from Palestine and Syria, where she also lived, and most recently from Venezuela. Hi, Eva. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much.
You were just in Venezuela. How, in your eyes, have the sanctions affected the Venezuelan people, and what's your impression of the support for the government of Nicolas Maduro now?
Yeah, well, I was in Venezuela at a time when international media was insisting there was a state of chaos in the streets in Caracas, and they were insisting that due to the sabotage in the electrical grid, although they did not admit it was sabotage, they insisted that the people were against President Maduro. However, I was able to attend 2 different rallies, in addition to another day in which hundreds of motorcycles, Venezuelan citizens, came to the National Assembly to defend the peace of the National Assembly. On March 16th, they joined a mass demonstration where there were thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of demonstrators who walked for hours. It was a very lively demonstration. They were very vocal in why they had come to that demonstration, what they were defending. They were defending their Bolivarian revolution, their government, and they were against imperialism. They were very clear about their knowledge of what the U.S. is trying to do to Venezuela. And they also, when I asked them about Juan Guaido, they rejected him as any sort of leader, and they firmly stated that the president was Nicolas Maduro. I did also attempt to go to opposition rallies on 2 different occasions. On the 16th, there were supposed to be opposition rallies, but no one turned out. And on March 30th, I actually got on a motorcycle taxi. I went around to Candelaria, to El Paraíso, and eventually to Chacao and Altamira. In El Paraíso, I could not find any sort of opposition supporters. However, I did find a group of protesters supporting President Maduro walking towards a larger mass demonstration that occurred later in the day, but I found no opposition supporters. In Chacao, I found a couple handfuls of opposition supporters, and same in Altamira, which, as you know, is supposed to be one of the strongholds of the opposition in Caracas. So it was interesting to see that in spite of all the claims on Twitter, social media, that Juan Guaido has mass support, I wasn't able to find any, and I certainly did try. However, walking the streets in Caracas, whether in Western Caracas or downtown, I did find support for Nicolas Maduro.
And Eva, first of all, I wanted to say that all the images we're showing are, of course, the images that you filmed while you were there. As you said, you were there during the time that the country was hit by a sabotage against the national power grid. What did you see with regards to that? And I also wanted to ask you about these images that you have when you were documenting residents collecting water. Tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So the images you're showing on screen, I took within the first few days on my arrival, and I arrived on March 10th. And so I was basically trying to show that whereas corporate media was saying that the shelves are empty in supermarkets. In fact, during a power outage in which the metro was shut down, there were still stores open, and restaurants open and food stalls open. And obviously you can see ordinary Venezuelans patronizing these places. That's not to say that all Venezuelans, the poorest Venezuelans, could patronize them, could visit them, but there are other systems in place to subsidize, to provide food for them. And I went to, although it's not being shown on the screen, I went to Patari, and even there, in the highest barrios in Patari, I found signs of people selling chicken and other meats and cheese and vegetables. You could see produce when you went to the main square in Patari. You saw all sorts of shops open selling meats, and also pharmacies open. So clearly what I was seeing was a stark contrast to what corporate media was insisting. And I think it was really important to point that out, because corporate media, international media, was trying to paint a scene of chaos in Venezuela, and I did not see that. And I do like to point out that I lived in Caracas in 2010, and the Venezuela I was seeing in March was not a whole lot different from 2010, except there were less people on the streets because the metro wasn't running. And I did go up to the mountain of Huayra Repana, I believe it is, and I saw 2 different instances of water collection. One was a government-organized water collection in which there were big tankers that were filling up with mountain spring water, clean, drinkable water, and they were being sent around the city with a priority of attending hospitals and bringing water to hospitals. And the other thing I saw on the same mountain was, again, mountain springs, Venezuelan citizens calmly waiting to collect water. And this, I think, was very important to emphasize the calmly. Yes, there was a power outage due to the sabotage, and yes, this affected the water supply, but Venezuelans, everywhere I went, were calmly waiting for whatever it was, whether it was drinking water or whether it was at an ATM when the power was back on. And so on this mountain, I saw people collecting water to take back home. I also was able to speak with people with dissenting views. One person was very open about her views on President Maduro. She wasn't incredibly nuanced. The other woman I spoke with was very nuanced on what she was defending, on being aware of what the U.S. was attempting to do in Venezuela. And this was a theme I saw over and over again. Whenever I did have a chance to speak to an opposition supporter, I found a lack of nuance, a lack of direction or actual ideas on what they wanted for the country. Whereas when I spoke to supporters of Venezuela, supporters of the Constitution and the government, I found that they were very, very well versed on why they were defending Venezuela. So I think it's just important to say there was not the state of chaos that corporate media was trying to paint, and there was not this massive people in the streets trying to oust President Maduro. To the contrary, I saw a defense of the president and the Constitution in the country.
And Eva, finally, I'd like to ask you how you'd relate what you've reported on in Venezuela to some of the other places you've reported on, and like with reference to the corporate media in North America, specifically maybe the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, since you're in Ontario now.
Yeah. Basically, I see the same pattern of regime change propaganda that I've seen with Syria, and of course that we've all seen with Libya before, with Iraq, with so many other nations being targeted by imperialists. And this pattern is first the extreme demonization of the leadership of the country. So in the case of Syria, President Assad; in the case of Venezuela, President Maduro. It's very cartoonish rhetoric that is intended to sway a Western public into believing there's a need for the West to go in and quote unquote save the people in these countries. And then along with that, you have more and more propaganda along the lines of people are starving, there's chaos in the streets, the government's cracking down on protesters. To the contrary, in Caracas, I saw they weren't guarimbas, but they were people setting up barricades and lighting them on fire in the middle of Caracas, and the police and the National Guard were allowing them to do this. And I was told by local journalists this was a form of protest in order to draw attention to a specific need they had. Now, not to be confused with guarimbas, which obviously you know well, but for viewers, the guarimbas are very violent street protests that attack civilians. But these particular ones were isolated. And I was told by local journalists that once their need is met, for example, a water tanker, the barricades are disassembled. And so my question is, if, according to corporate media, this is a dictatorship that is cracking down on protesters, why are there people in the streets allowed to set up these barricades in the middle of busy streets, disrupt life, set things on fire, and they are not being quashed down upon? The answer is because what the corporate media has been portraying is not true. So in the case of Syria, they've been saying for years that the president and the army are cracking down on the people. It's not true. In fact, in contrast, the people are the army, and they support the army, and they support the president. And I know it's not black and white the same exact in Venezuela, but I'm seeing the parallels that the corporate media, the international media, is trying to sell to a Western public that the Venezuelan government is bad and we need to save them. It's extremely ironic and hypocritical, if I may, Camila, because the sanctions, as you mentioned at the beginning, are dramatically affecting Venezuelans' lives. We've seen a report by American economists recently saying 40,000 people from 2017 to 2018 have died as a result of the sanction, and hundreds of thousands more are at risk. And we know the effect the sanctions have had on Syria and on many other states. And if I can just make one other point, since I did live in Gaza. In Gaza, the power plant, the Sol power plant, was attacked by Israel in 2006. And since then, Palestinians have not been able to adequately reconstruct the power plant, meaning since then, they've suffered power outages of up to 20 hours of no power a day. So these hypocrites, Marco Rubio, John Bolton, all these U.S. talking heads, pretend to care for Venezuelans when there is a sabotage on your grid, which causes a power outage for a number of days. It's quite clear their hypocrisy when they don't care about the Palestinians in Gaza or the people of Yemen or the many other countries where preventable and real crises have taken place as a direct result of imperialist or Zionist policies.
Thank you so much for reporting back following your trip to Venezuela. We've been speaking to Eva Bartlett. She's speaking to us from Canada and recently returned from reporting on the ground in Venezuela. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. Telesur documentaries. Sundays. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Days after cutting off electricity, the U.S. government has turned off water at the Venezuelan embassy in Washington in order to try to force the Embassy Protection Collective to leave. The diplomatic office now has no electricity, no running water, and very little food as Venezuelan opposition figures and their supporters, along with law enforcement, have been blocking activists as they attempt to enter the building with basic supplies. The organizations Popular Resistance, Answer Coalition, and Code Pink, along with other activists, have been in the embassy for over 4 weeks as guests of the Venezuelan government. They say they're committed to protecting the sovereign territory from being taken over by the U.S. and Venezuelan opposition. The opposition became violent this week, injuring and harassing supporters of the Bolivarian government and journalists. With the upsurge of aggression, additional supporters of the Embassy Protection Collective have gathered outside to chant in solidarity with the Venezuelan people and activists inside. The Uruguayan prosecutor's office specializing in crimes against humanity has ordered a raid on the house of the prominent dictatorship figure José Nino Gavazo. Gavazo has a long record of crimes against humanity and publicly confessed to throwing the body of a disappeared man into the Paraná River after murdering him. The operation, authorized by Judge Elena Iriarte, lasted for at least 5 hours. Seized documents were transferred to a criminal court that is investigating the case of 28 women political prisoners who in 2011 denounced inhumane treatment against them by the dictatorship. Gavazo has been sentenced to 30 years in prison for dozens of crimes against humanity. Thousands of protesters in London held a rally for Palestinian rights. They were joined at the National Demonstration for Palestine by icon of resistance Ahed Tamimi. The march was organized by a number of groups, including the Palestinian Solidarity Committee, the Stop the War Coalition, and the Palestinian Forum in Britain. They condemn Israeli oppression, its violation of international law, and its lack of respect for human rights. Ahed Tamimi addressed the crowd, estimated at 10,000 people, saying that the Palestinians will not be made victims and that they will continue to resist. Tamimi became known after being arrested by Israeli forces in 2017 for opposing illegal settlement expansion and retaliating to oppression. She was released in July 2018 after spending 8 months incarcerated.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. First, I want to thank you all. It was your voice that kept me strong while being in the Israeli prisons. I want to thank you for your support and solidarity, for your everything that you are doing to help our cause. I don't wish to speak today about our suffering under Israeli colonialism. I don't want for our story to be written as a victimhood, and I refuse to be divided by it. We choose to struggle for freedom and justice. We choose to be a freedom fighters. Injustice anywhere, injustice everywhere. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you.
The London protests took place just a week after one of the deadliest attacks conducted by Israel's forces in Gaza since the 2014 war. At least 25 Palestinians died in Israeli bombing raids last weekend, while 4 Israelis were killed in retaliatory rocket attacks. Today marks 38 years since the Jamaican musician Bob Marley died. Through his music, Bob Marley denounced social problems in Jamaica, Africa, and the entire world. His music was marked with peace, love, and reconciliation. In Africa, especially Zimbabwe, people reflect on the day when the music icon graced the country's independence celebrations in 1980 and composed a song dedicated to the country's liberation from colonialism.
With arms, We'll fight this little struggle. Own destiny. And in this judgment there is no partiality. We gon' fight. We gonna fight. We'll have to fight. Fighting for our rights. Mash it up in a Zimbabwe. Set it up in a Zimbabwe. Africans are liberate Zimbabwe. I liberate Zimbabwe.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at tellusenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Our English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.